I was very moved when I saw the paintings that you had made. I guess there was one in a show that Michael Rosenfeld did with the hand, like the presence of the hand and the motif of the hand. And it made me think about, if we locate, I mean, obviously we can't know whatever was really happening with cave paintings, but there is, in what we could locate as the earliest man-made images, this kind of presence of the hand, like it's an image of the hand, and the way that it's made is, or that they assume it's made, is with pigment put in the mouth and then spat or blown onto the hand, which is then removed. I was always really interested in that as a location for painting, as a possibility of painting that is as much about the breath as it is about the hand, as it is about touch, and that it could open up, but painting itself as a human capacity could open up in different directions than just like, here's my eyes and here's my wrist moving.
Well, the hand motif appears in Moreau's where it appears. There's Hans Hofmann's, it appears, Jasper Johns. It's a kind of body part that many, many artists have used historically for different reasons with different kind of narrative content attached to it. My use had to do with my daughter at a very age was in the studio, and she took her hand, put it in the paint, and slapped it on one of the abstract paintings, the geometric paintings. And I was horrified, obviously, because at that point, this idea of this kind of cleanliness and, but then all of a sudden I realized, there was this kind of primeval thing that she had done. And as such, it was much more expressive and much more, it had more presence than what the painting had. And probably over the next 3 years, it gradually began to, I began to think about that more and more. And it didn't have to do with painting. It had to do with this kind of exploration of trying to figure out what I thought painting could be about. Removing skill, removing the intellectual from it, removing all of those kind of graduate school ideas that one has at that point about painting. And when I came out the other side of that, what I had arrived at was the physicality of the material. A relaxation of theoretical ideas about what painting had to be about. Absolutely no belief that skill had anything to do with art. Skill had to do with maybe conveying an idea, but not necessarily what art was about. Art was still this kind of elusive thing for me. And that allowed me to begin to think about the idea that one, paintings didn't have to be sequential in terms of, there's this series of paintings, there's this series of paintings, this evolves out of that. Although that's still happening in work, I was far more, wedded to the idea of each day when I went in the studio, I had to create a new experience. It couldn't be dependent upon the experience that I had had the day before. It wasn't a continuation. It was a absolute new experience each and every time. If you look close at those paintings where the hands are, there are also safety pins that are embedded within the paint. And that embedding of the safety pin had to do with, again, a autobiographical kind of thing, of a remembrance of ladies that I grew up with, the women I grew up with, always had safety pins, especially the older ones would have safety pins in their garments. And just that idea of an image that was so burnt into my psyche of something out of childhood that could be recycled, could be used in a painting, although it's embedded, although it's under the paint. It's this journey, this process to get to that visual experience. And very much in a lot of the paintings now, there are sub-paintings, starting points that are obscured. But I enjoy that kind of process of bringing as many autobiographical experiences as possible. And that might not be the right word, autobiographical experience.
Why do you say it might not be the right word? Like how else might you characterize them?
I tend to want to make an object, make something, have people have an experience with it without all of that kind of informational stuff that comes from it, because I want their experience to be separate from my experience. They're not experiencing me, they're experiencing this object. I'm just a in-between to make the object, because that object has to do with, for me, with a long tradition of object making.
When you relate to a painting or an object that you didn't make, how does it disclose itself? Like, how does it actually operate in those terms for you that we then might use almost structurally to understand, like, the way that one might look at your paintings?
Well, if I go to the museum or to an opening, first thing I do is look at paintings. I'm probably 12 inches away from the painting. And I try to put my head in the head of the painter of what he or she did in terms of touch, what's underneath, what's on top, the translucency, the transparency, the physical act of painting, and trying to reconstruct that image or that object or whatever it is from that structure. When I back up, it's of less interest to me. The iconography really doesn't interest me. It's the process that interests me. And that's where I'm informed in terms of how it can help me in terms of the next thing. What I always used to say in the classroom to students is, no matter how bad the paintings are, there's something to be learned as a painter. And you have to, it's your job to look hard, to find that information in relation to that painting, because another human being made it. And as such, they too are part of this kind of continuum.
In terms of artists that did something that were useful for you to think with or against, like who stands out?
I like Morandi. And I like it for all the wrong reasons. The paring down of it, the kind of single-mindedness of that kind of pursuit, the scale of it. Because these things are 9, 10 inches, and I was working, 10 feet. The idea of in that small framework being able to create something that's that control and that magical, from the color to the light, to the surface, to the touch, and the continuation of that those kind of controls are not accidental, that there is that returning commitment to a kind of mindset.
I just had the pleasure of looking at a large group of Mirandis maybe 2 days ago. And what is so palpable in them, especially when you have a number of them together, is the fact that they never, there's no solution to them. Like there's this sense that, and what I mean is that they're not resolved. I just mean the problem of making a painting as encountering light and space and time and objects and transforming that into a painted surface. There's like, you get the sense this is the best I could do today. And then it's got to start all over again tomorrow. And so he's one of those artists that really embodies the studio as a way of thinking and being, and an attitude towards being alive, actually, that is different than just like making stuff. It seems to me.
I think painting is a way of life. And unfortunately, as contemporary artists, sometimes we're far more involved in art as business and art as performance. And I don't mean performance as performing artists, but what I mean by that is we isolate the art from life. We talk about the art world as a kind of enclosed, kind of privileged place to be. And but we want the art to open up to everybody. So unless our lives open up to everybody all the time, every day, that's not going to occur. It will be a kind of specialized activity that maybe loses some of the vitality of everyday experience. And I think that everydayness is also very much in the Mirandis, that the objects that he paints are not very, I mean, they're pretty mundane kind of things, but the idea that he slows down enough to see those mundane things is very much, it's for me, is like the linoleum, like a mundane experience that has no redeeming qualities. It's a deadpan material. And I like those kind of experiences, of deadpan experiences.
The thing that I've found is very hard to convey, especially to younger artists, but I guess to everyone, is, and I believe this to be true, which is that you have to live your entire life in a certain way to make a certain kind of art. And it's almost as though the life has to be organized around making in a particular way in order to make art that it aspires to a certain level of seriousness or complexity. And I don't even mean complexity in the way it's made. I just mean internal complexity. And
I met Romy Bearden when I was a young artist just coming out of graduate school. And he said something to me. He said, "Bill, painting is a long distance run." And over the years, I've thought about that. And Dory Ashton said something very similar to me when I met her, and I was just out of graduate school. And she said, it takes a long time for a painter to develop, because you have to, you spend the early part trying to understand the material, how to make, and you spend the latter part trying to figure out why you're making, what all this stuff makes. And that's one of the things I try to convey in the years of teaching, was that you think what you're doing when you're very young is good, and it might be very good. It might be very informative. It might be, a new direction that opens up for a lot of artists. But it's not. The important thing is live long and keep painting. And the winner is who paints the longest, basically. It's that simple. It's that simple because, you're enjoying this activity and you're searching for something. And it just seems to me that all the artists that were friends over the years had a similar attitude. I'm going into the studio, I'm going to work, I'm going to work, I'm going to work. I'm not going to have distractions because some of those distractions are temporary. Some of the issues are temporary. But the long-term goal is what I have to stay focused on. Getting back to that tricky thing of content, though, the idea of why you do it and what you're trying to communicate. I look at art as a celebration. I hope that it's always reaffirming life. Mm-hmm. I'm not that interested in pointing out the flaws of society. I'm far more interested in the idea of redemption, that art is a vehicle for redemption. It's a vehicle for celebration, and it's a vehicle for the connection of the human spirit. That's my temperament, I think, a little bit. My voice outside of painting is very different than the voice in painting, but the two are not the same. In other words, whatever frustrations I might have with the society and or my political thought is different than my painting.
When did you become aware that those were two separate things, like your life in the world and your life within the paintings?
The late 60s, early 70s, until 1971. Since 1971, I've never had another person in the studio working with me. And that solitary thing leads you very much to have a alter ego or an alter person in the studio. I don't bring whatever happens if I'm walking down the street and someone insults me or something. I don't bring that into the studio. When I cross the threshold of my studio, the consciousness of all that has to be gone. If obviously by that time I probably internalized it, and I can use it through that kind of internal mechanism. But the conscious thinking of that, I don't allow that to happen in the studio. If I go in the studio and there's a preoccupation with something that occurred in the street or on the news, I don't paint because I don't want those two things to overlap. Once it's internalized, I can use it. If it's consciously on my mind, I can't use it. I can't paint, I can't use it because the narrative is in my head and I'm thinking about that narrative.
What I appreciate about the conversation that we've had, and you've been so generous to talk about your paintings and your motives in various instances over the years. And what I really value about it is you're willing to talk about art as having meaning that has nothing to do with its monetary value. Mm-hmm. And I find that is so endangered in just the kind of basic ways in which people who are in the quote unquote art world interact. I find you at the moment, you really have to advocate for, it's like, actually this activity has a self-evident value that has nothing to do with it becoming a commodity. And then actually it's a separate thing.
Well, I think that comes out of being in the classroom, is that mm-hmm. you realize that you're being entrusted with a lot of young people's lives. Mm-hmm. And part of your job is, one, teaching the mechanics of the medium, technically how to use the medium, how to approach that. But also you giving them some parameters to think about what the activity is, how did it start, You get back to you talked about the cave experience. Why did that person do that? Why is that? Why every culture there are, there are artists. There's some ritualistic way of defining something outside of self. And having students to think about that. It's not, I never saw my job was to tell people what to do in the classroom. That was not the way my classrooms were. They were wide open to whatever the student was interested in. My job was to find a way of helping them to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
My first painting class, the kids had to do one painting. The trick was the first 4 weeks, they had to erase the painting every week. Getting away from preciousness. That it's not about the picture, it's the process of constructing, of learning and knowing. It's also the kind of accumulation of texture and surfaces that now you have to work against or with.
Your paintings have so much to do with their physical presence in space between your body and their body as a thing in ways that very pointedly evade and antagonize reproduction. And how have you seen that change, and how have you responded to the relationship to reproduction within your own working process?
Well, that's a tricky one. The paintings that I did between 1972 and probably 75 were almost impossible to reproduce. Mm-hmm. That's problematic, and that's they're not reproduced that often. In terms of the body of my work, people are much more aware of the things from the early 70s. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of the ones that were done in the last 10 years. A lot of the painters that I liked was this idea: you walk in the studio and you have an idea. You see something where the tones are not quite right, and you go in and you do it. Sometimes you lose it, you mess it up, or it doesn't come out like you want it. But the idea that the thing is always open to revision, it's always open to engagement. It's always a new experience. That I like a great deal.
One thing that's sort of provocative that I've been thinking about, things that you've said that are provocative that I've been thinking about throughout this conversation, both with the submerged safety pins, but also with the assignment, and also thinking about the way that the process of how your paintings come into being, is how do you regard the parts of the painting or of a painting that is not visibly accessible?
You mean because it's underneath the surface?
Yeah.
Good question. Lately, if you look at the surfaces, there's usually a kind of indentation, either an indentation or there's a slight relief. So when you go up close, you begin to realize, there's something that was painted over. And lately, I began to kind of leave it. A lot of the paintings sometimes have birds that are visible, or there's a letter in the painting that's visible. There's some kind of relief that I put in it. Those are moments of, how would I say it? They're more conscious moments when I go choose something and put it in. It may be something, a bird has flown past the studio or something, but something kind of initiates the thought of what would happen if I put that in. And it's playful for me in the studio. The safety pins were a direct connection in terms of trying to talk about an autobiographical thing that many people that I grew up with would recognize. And again, have that kind of eureka moment. Oh God, yes, I remember that. oh, Mrs. Such and Such used to do that all the time. But, it's like mixing a literal human experience in with something that's more elusive. One of the shimmering paintings is called New Nile.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that's been reproduced a lot. And it was interesting. One of the artists that came to me and said, gee, you really like that, was David Hammond. And what struck me about that is knowing David's kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of attitude sometimes about using materials. And I asked him why he liked it. And he said it reminded me of waves. And I said, like on the can of New Nile hairdressing. And he kind of smiled and said yes. And that was the impetus for that painting, was my daughter's name, which is Nyla. But also there was a hairdressing that was very prevalent in communities where, in homes where I grew up, they would have New Nile hairdressing. And it had this, it's still made. And it comes out of Detroit, I think, Michigan somewhere. But it had a close-up of hair that does that, very much like the paintings. But that's well embedded, layers and layers below the surface. That's not the content of the painting. It's just a kind of tongue-in-cheek thing that I do with a lot of the paintings sometimes, either with title and or the submersion of the pens and things of that nature. It allows me to play with two different kinds of things consciously. Like the title of, you were talking about Train, and you said that you were a fan of Alice Coltrane.
Yes, she's my hero.
Right. The title of the painting, Train, again, was that kind of double take of the air conditioner, train.
It's hard to stop a train.
And that idea of the title has nothing to do with the painting. And it was kind of an illustration that the title of the painting has nothing to do with that. And if you are perceiving rhythmic things within the painting, is that the association of the title that brings you there? And or is it the engagement with the painting itself, the structure of the painting? Those were kind of implicit questions that a lot of the work from that time I was playing with.
Well, one of the things that language affixed to a painting does is it can either really close it down, or the abstraction of the title can meet the abstraction of the painting to amplify each other. And so in the instance of New Nile, one of the things that I think is so beautiful about that as a title is you laid out the specificity of the brand of the hair stuff, the relationship to the styling of the hair and the waves of hair, but also with the New Nile as the river, the undulant surface of the painting becomes the surface of the water. And then beyond that, the term New Nile, it's so cosmic. It's like a dream. It's like, if you think about like the civilization of the Nile as a framework, or the Nile as something that organized this vast continent, and also the civilizations that developed around it with their like incredible sophistication. And then we have a New Nile, it feels almost metaphysical. It can go this very big place as well as it can go to this very precise place. And I think the fact that both of those are contained within that particular painting is sort of really astonishing, and it's real beauty to me.
Thank you. No one's ever said that to me. My goodness. Well, it's such a minute part of the world, the art world. In relation to what this big thing out there called, everyday life and everyday people. That's the hard struggle. Is like for me, the visual arts, you do this thing in a studio someplace and you put it into the world, and in the light of current events, who the hell cares? What difference it's going to make? How many people really know? You're talking about such a 1% of 1,000% of 1,000,000% or something of the world's population. So where does belief come in? Where does the importance come in? It has to be with the individual artist and his or her belief in reaffirming life somehow, and that this object, hopefully, as it travels into the world, some people will see it and have this kind of experience with it. If it's just one person in the history of the world, then hopefully one person is better off. That's a kind of blind faith that you have in this activity if you're involved in it.
Your work has been so concerted about finding a way of making paintings that were not derivative of other painting languages.
It's the only identity that I would have. I should clarify what I'm saying by that. It's like the Pollock example, getting back to Pollock. You see a Pollock, you know a Pollock, you experience a Pollock. There's no need for any artist to attempt to come out of Pollock. It's just, from my standpoint, it's not possible. He is one of the few artists in the history of art. There's no place else to go within that language. Not that makes him a great artist, but what it does within that context of that generation is that he pushed one facet of that to the point where there's an identifiable experience that no other artist presented. And yet there were paths that were obvious to everyone. I think we're at a point now where, from the critical standpoint, things, it's not as closed down as it was in the late 60s, middle 60s, in terms of you don't have a dominant kind of thought of what art could be now. It's open up to lots and lots of possibilities. What was at stake for me was I'm not interested in being a good artist. That's never been my pursuit. The idea is, how can the body of work, or one painting or two paintings, open up a world for other artists? And how many paintings did Vermeer do? Not many. It takes a young artist see one painting that opens up another world. And I think part of my pursuit is I sincerely believe that art is important, that I've dedicated my life to this activity, that there's a body of work somewhere in the hundreds and thousands of images. There might be one image that's of merit in the history of this activity. I might not be articulate enough to see it or to name it, to give it a theoretical basis, but I am absolutely sure that it exists. the way my work has developed since then, some of the changes had to do with consciously making a break from the bodies of work into other bodies of work.
Mm-hmm.
What I've tried to do is each time there's a shift in the work from the early geometry to the 70s, there's always a geometric underpinning to the body of works that I'm involved in now. The surface kind of incrustation, the kind of fracturing of the surface, and that questioning of the whole idea of a time element, the idea of a surface that can be a metaphor for time as opposed to a depiction of time or a symbol of something, but how you're processing that surface. Because initially, when people look at it, they think of decay.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's not about decay, it's about time.
It's like about accretion or condensation.
Yeah, and it's a reading of a Matisse painting again. So many of the Matisse paintings, when you look at them now, they have that kind of fissuring in them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where the paintings come apart. For me, it had to do with the more I was going to museums, the more I was seeing that. And I was realizing my experience with those paintings are with that kind of surface. It's not what Matisse made. This is what exists now. So I have to experience that, which has little or nothing to do with what he painted. And an acceptance of that allowed me to, from a material standpoint, to begin to allow that to seep into the painting. Really not waiting for that to happen. I'm bringing that firsthand. So there's this element of time that's involved, kind of almost I don't want to say metaphor for time, but it also allowed me to have an all-over surface, which gets back to one of the other tenets of the shimmering paintings.
Right.
And that all-over surface allowed me to do a lot of other things in terms of painting. Allowed me to get rid of a lot of kind of formalist things and things that came out of early painting, early thoughts that I had about painting. But
Well, the last, I love the distinction that you made that you were never trying to be a quote unquote a good artist, but the part of that that's not challenged is like to be an artist. And I know it's like the most dopey kind of foundational question, but like at this point, having lived your life, devoted to being an artist and making art, like how do you see the role or the responsibility of the artist as what is an artist?
One of the phrases that a lot of the young artists, when I say young, younger than I am, make, they always say, in my practice, I do such and such. I don't practice anymore. I'm past practice. And what I say to them is stop using that word because one, it's you're not a doctor, you're not, and if I take it literally, the language they're beginning to use, it spreads across the art world, and all of the kids are using the same language to talk about their work. For me, it's a commitment to affirming life. Mm-hmm. I'm most alive when I'm making art. I think art is important. I think it's more important now than ever before. It's one of those things that when I say art, I mean across the board of musicians and poets and writers and actors and the gamut of dancers. It's the one activity, cross-cultural boundaries, that communicates. That a musician from India can play with a musician from Mexico, from the US. There's this common thing they have that opens their heart up to the human experience. And I think it's the same thing with visual artists. As I've traveled over the years and met painters and artists from other countries and other cultures, there's always this kind of common thing that happens immediately in terms of across language, we start to talk about the art and start to communicate it about the art. And there's this commonality of trying to talk about the human spirit, affirming life. That's what it means to me to be an artist. I mean, it's just that simple. Every day when I come in here, that's all I'm trying to do, is affirm life. I'm trying to say to the world, I lived, I existed, and I'm part of the human experience. And this body of work is about the human experience. You can subtitle it, you can subdivide it into being about the American experience, the Black American experience. You can do all of that, but those experiences are all the same. That's what I'm trying to do every day.
So this is the part of the set where you pick up the mic and drop it. There's nowhere else to go after that.
All right.